Good evening, everyone. For today's session, we have with us Advocate Dinesh Bishnoi sir, who is registered Bar Council member of Maharashtra and Goa and is currently practicing at Bombay High Court, Mumbai. He is also an accredited mediator and a retired colonel from Indian Army. His educational background includes LLB degree with international law apart from diploma in senior level management. His practice includes litigation, arbitration, mediation, adjudication and conciliation in all areas. He has conducted various judicial trials as the presiding officer of various courts and has also been appointed and acted as the sole arbitrator, mediator in number of commercial contractual mediation cases. Sir has been active in resolving disputes of almost all areas, including cases of land, real estate, industrial, and construction dispute cases related to securities, insurance, telecommunication, and contractual disputes in particular. Sir is a lifetime member, associate member of various prestigious organizations, and on the panel of alternative dispute resolution and online dispute resolution of arbitrators, mediators, and conciliators. He is also a distinguished member of Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, Singapore Institute of Arbitrators, and fellow member of Dispute Board Federation Switzerland. Sir has conducted various seminars on various topics. Some of them are on challenges to enforcement and execution of arbitral award, law of arbitration, practice procedure, etc. He is also engaged in providing various training courses and activities in the field of arbitration. It's a privilege to have you with us, sir, since in your distinguished and illustrious career of 38 years, you have been awarded twice by the Honorable President of India. Great to have you with us, sir.
Very good morning to all of you. I'm so grateful that you have invited me to have this interaction. Also grateful to Global Initiative for Alternative Dispute Awareness. In short, we call GYATRA, an oracle for ADR of Bharati Vidyapeeth, deemed to be university, New Law College, Pune's Madhyastha, the ADR cell. We have chosen a topic today, and the topic has been given to me is today and tomorrow's arbitrators, future developments in selection and conduct of arbitrators. Now, it is a very vast subject, and it is a very generalized subject. So I had a choice that I get bogged down with the various acts of various jurisdictions and also give you the case laws. But then I thought that I will be doing injustice to the subject if I do that. So in today's session, we'll go and conduct this in a basic form, and given an opportunity, I look forward for another session in which we can go deeper and tackle various sections of various countries' acts and also international treaties and instruments, and also the case laws of various jurisdictions. Now, coming to the topic as such. Now, the arbitrators, now if we go back to the history, there is no jurisdiction and there is no country and there is no place where disputes were not there. And if the disputes were there, then the resolution was also there. And if you cut out the word ADRA, alternative has come only after the courts have come into existence. Now, once the court were not there, the dispute resolution was there. Now, after courts have come into existence, so we have started calling it alternative dispute resolution other than the court, outside the court. Now, this dispute resolution used to happen in all communities across the continent, across the globe, on the planet. Now, earlier, the elders in the family used to be requested and used to get involved in dispute resolution. Thereafter, the scope enlarged. And then we started looking for some more in the neighborhood, in the village, or in the town. More people who were competent, neutral, impartial, independent, objective. Now, we started looking for these qualities long back. If I have a dispute, I will look forward for the same. So there is no change. It is only the documentation part, and we have institutionalized what was going on for centuries. Some jurisdictions have documented it, and some are carrying on with their traditions and conventions and customs. So you have heard in India specific, otherwise also like panchayats or community and the other forms and forums for dispute resolution. Now, we will now delve into the second part of the issue before we take on the question and answers, the today's and tomorrow. Now, the complexities now are coming up because of some at local level and some at international level. So local level, like you have your grandpa and he favors one grandchild in compared to other grandchild. So people understand that he is his favorite, he is blue-eyed. So they will never go for a settlement with that guy. They will go for the independent person who treats both the grandchildren at par and doesn't differentiate or doesn't exhibit his liking or disliking for either. Now, we'll take it to the international level. International level also, what is happening that with the latest announcements of various judgments in almost all jurisdictions, including USA, UK, India, Singapore, and all other the law communities also, like France and other places. What is happening that the conscionable or unconscionable bias is coming to fore. Now, this is a huge area, and we don't have time today to go deep into it. In the next section, we'll cover all these things. Summarize to say that what we look forward for in a person to resolve our dispute, the same goes to the process of appointing the arbitrator. Now, as law students or as a common man also, a question how the arbitrators are appointed. So, as far as institutions go, so we know we approach institution or we have an agreement or the parties have laid out a procedure for appointment of arbitrator. So in any scenario, it is laid down. Like, for example, Section 11 of the Indian Arbitration Act is a huge and most sought after. And almost every month, there is a judgment on this. So the law is evolving. Various contingencies are coming in. And various threats, I would rather call it challenges, are surfacing. And to tackle those, the jurisprudence is also keeping pace with this. So in if now what I feel that I should give more time, guys, to put across questions so that let me see where you like me to focus more. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for explaining it so well. So, my first question to you would be, what are some of the factors which need to be considered while selecting an arbitrator?
A gentleman or a lady who could understand my problem, who has the knowledge to tackle that problem, and who has the expertise, and also he or she has exhibited in past that expertise. Also, that it is on record, it is a very close-knit society. Arbitrators are a very close society. So what you do today is known to whole world, though it is confidential in nature, but the reputation travels fast, and across the globe you will come to know that that arbitrator is very strict the timeline, and that arbitrator is little liberal, he accommodates the parties. So this way the reputation travels fast, and whatever one does is known to each and everybody, is there in the environment. So we see that if we feel that though nobody knows what we are doing because the proceedings are confidential in nature, no, it is not that. So the basic parameters are all laid down in the statutes, and these are all same in all jurisdictions. You travel and study all jurisdictions, more or less willy-nilly all the same, including the IBA guidelines and all the civil law and common law jurisdictions. Basically, what you would look forward for, the integrity. Then you look forward for independence. Then you look forward for neutrality. Then you look forward for objective approach. Then you look forward for the love for natural justice. Then, and there are host, there's endless. I hope this satisfied.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for explaining. My second question is, how can institutions or users judge whether an arbitrator has been truly proactive or efficient in the past, unless they have personal experience of him or her?
Okay, now I have already partially covered this and while answering the previous question. Now, I was doing an arbitration as a sole arbitrator. So the parties have some genuine problems, and the parties may not have those type of justified and genuine problems. So one has to differentiate and draw a balance. And what we see, if it is a unwritten law that if you have to study, then you see the section pertaining to challenges. And then you see when the awards were challenged, what was said by the courts. So you will understand that in what manner courts perceive or view this. So party, as I told you, that you have to draw a balance so that party doesn't come up with an excuse or a justification later that I was not given a fair opportunity to represent my case, or I was not given sufficient time, or the other parties was shown some favor, or things like that. So you have to draw a balance because you have to meet the deadline. And if you get stuck in a case where a party is adopting obstructionist attitude, then you then have to draw a line. You have to give chance, opportunity sufficient, adequate in the eyes of law, and then move forward. And sufficient safeguards are there, and courts are so fair, they will be able to find out as to whether you have given them the fair opportunity or they had adequate time in the eyes of law to have projected their case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. My next question to you would be, in the future, should the arbitrators be better educated as to what appointments they should accept or what appointments they should refuse?
Yes, what happens that there are fields. Now, like there is a gentleman who has never undertaken a construction arbitrator's job. Now, it's a specialized field as such. Now, he has to understand the intricacies of the construction, and then he has to cope up. He has to study, and he has to cope up. And the councils are there, and I don't say that no non-architect or the non-technical person can't arbitrate, because you are not looking forward for those, because you have the knowledge of experts and you have the parties, yet you must understand the basic nuances of that field. You could develop over time, or you could also develop it during the course of the arbitration. So I will not discourage the students and the arbitrators to get scared of this, because till the time you have those basic elements like impartiality, the independence, the clarity, the neutrality, and you are following the principle of natural justice, you will be able to cope up. It's not that difficult. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. My next question is, it is most likely that in future we will witness an emerging divide between procedures for resolving low value or low complexity disputes on one end and high value or high complexity on the other. What is the solution to this?
I must compliment you for all good questions. I must congratulate you. All these are very well framed questions, which shows depth and the range of your study and your knowledge. Like I am a maritime arbitrator. So now a person who has never studied anything or doesn't know, or he doesn't get involved in the business of maritime, how will he treat or how will he tackle? So some basic knowledge or some, I will not call it a expertise, but some know-how is, of course, it comes handy. Now, coming on to your question, now, and you have heard LMA, the London Maritime Arbitration. They have already in system 3 types of arbitrations, and they have the regulations, the acts, the manuals, the rules. One is small size, second is mid size, the third is the large size. So they have already 80% maritime cases are dealt with by them on the whole world globally. Now slowly other jurisdictions like Singapore and other jurisdictions are catching up, but the system is already there for other jurisdictions to follow. And yes, there is a case, and it requires, like a small case, if you start adopting the elaborate procedure, a waste of time, waste of energy, waste of resources. So they have the almost like a summary for the small cases. So like we also have in civil jurisdictions, the small cases are dealt with by the other court, the large cases are dealt with by the court. So similarly in arbitration also, So this is going to come up, and this will catch up in the coming days, and the days are not far when this issue will come up in the discussions, in the webinars, and also are amplified in the law commission reports, and government starts looking at it. Yes, there is a need, because today the credit card default is also, the process is the same, like is of thousand and lakhs of crores worth of the arbitration. So there is a case. I fully agree with you, and of course the basic tenements will remain same, but there is a case, and it will catch up. It is catching up. It is already there. It is coming up in various forums and the law commission reports. It's a matter of time that government realizes that yes, the government and judiciary has to come up in tandem and decide, and then something will get formulated. Thank you.
Thank you for providing such great insights, sir. Moving forward, my next question to you would be: requirement that a sole arbitrator or chairman of the 3-member arbitral tribunal be from a nationality different from the parties. Is this requirement necessary?
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the sole arbitrator or the chairperson or the presiding arbitrator is now, if you see the international arbitrations and at global level, it is only to inject transparency and the confidence level. And if you can ensure that transparency and that confidence level, I don't think there is a requirement. But the confidence of parties, it is all party autonomy. So you may say so, like, at the end of the day, you say that we have the sovereign, we are the sovereign power, and we have to protect our country's interest. That nationalist approach vis-a-vis the global approach, because business is going global, and it's a global village now. So you got to like we say, that justice should not only be done, it should look like as if it has been done. So it is all an unfairness that this provision has been made, and I don't think there is any harm in it. It ensures the transparency, and it ensures the fairness, and ultimately it is all the award would be vetted, verified, and then it is enforceable in much more better way. It will have more sanctity, it will have more authenticity, it will have more strength. And then if the the wisdom of the third arbitrator, who is independent, is there with the tribunal, it always goes for the value addition in each and every field, in the award, in the procedure, in the confidence of the parties. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. My next question is, appointing non-lawyers as arbitrator, is there a trend towards, or is there are any pitfalls for that?
No, look, I would put it in this way, that if you see, there are technical arbitrators who are much better than the general arbitrators, and there are general arbitrators who are much better than the technical arbitrators. So it is both ways. Of course, the technical arbitrator bring with them lot of expertise and knowledge, but then we also have the provisions and the principle that as an arbitrator, we should not use our own personal knowledge. So on one hand, we are trying to bring in the technical expertise with the arbitrator. On the other hand, almost in all jurisdictions in common law as well as in civil law, we say that the arbitrator should use his own personal knowledge. He should decide the case. What is existing before him has come on the record, is available on the record, whether it is experts' opinion, experts' report, or the oral or written evidence, whatever is existing. Unless, of course, both the parties agree. Again, this provision you will find everywhere in all jurisdictions. So if both the parties have confidence, both the parties have agreed, and both parties want, and they have mandated, yes, of course, the arbitrator can go ahead. There's no problem. I don't think we should go into calling this as a pitfall. There's no pitfall. There are, like I told you, in a case of the Indian Supreme Court, set aside the majority award, but same award was completely not set aside. Only the technical arbitrator's point of view was ratified, and it was enforced. So now, coming on to the same point, that the both sides, it works both ways. It's not necessarily that a technical arbitrator might not be that good. Not. I don't agree with that point of view. It both ways. Arbitrator is an arbitrator, and he is supposed to have the knowledge, and he would have the knowledge, and he would have the expertise. And before I part with this question, I would also say that if the technical arbitrator is also a lawyer or from the legal background, nothing like it. And but if an arbitrator is not a technical arbitrator, he is arbitrating, he is also no less. So one should not, read too much in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So moving forward, we have another related question. How specialized should an arbitrator be? Has specialization become a necessity, or is it overrated?
No, like I mentioned, there are two specific areas I had mentioned earlier. One is construction. Second is maritime. Now you come to cyber. So how will an arbitrator who doesn't have that background, now your blockchain technology or the artificial intelligence and digital technology and all these things are coming up, and there are going to be, they're not going to be, there are disputes. So in a period of time, so all these are going to play a very important role. So either the people would find out who has been dealing with such sort of cases, who has got this expertise, or institutions also have started maintaining the panels that this arbitrator is good at in so and so field, in so and so field. So in a period of time now, in coming days, with the complexities of the subject matters, it is going to play an important role. That space, the sports, the entertainment, and the a host of other fields. So that would require. So in that case, what happens? Either the parties nominate, or if the parties don't nominate, then both the arbitrators which have been nominated by both the parties, they would look forward for a person as their chairman or the presiding arbitrator, who is in that field, who could guide them, or who could be provide assistance, or who could, in the discussions and deliberations within the tribunal itself, can be an asset to the tribunal and its decisions, or in the process of decision making. So yes, there is a case, and it would in coming days more and more will get to various fields and these specialties. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for explaining the answer. My next question is it true that selection of the party-appointed arbitrator may be the most critical decision in an international arbitral proceeding? It can even at par with the choice of the counsel.
Yeah, another interesting question. A very challenging question, I would say. The second part is more challenging. Whether it is at par with the counsel, selection of counsel. The basic difference I would explain. The basic tenet says that what you should do, that your selection of arbitrator, once it is made, put on record, accepted, and come into force, thereafter he is gone. You can't brief him, you can't meet him, you can't have a say. Now all arbitrators by profession, why are we called professionals? Reason is, moment we are appointed the arbitrator by any party, irrespective of then if you feel as an outsider that he is my arbitrator or he would favor me, no. Moment he starts acting as an arbitrator, he forgets about the party affiliation. He would act, he should, he must, and he will, and he shall act as an independent arbitrator, and will forget till the time proceedings are over who has nominated. So now second part, coming on to the second part. Is it at par with selection of counsel? Yes, of course. Why? You would look forward for, like I have already dwelt this question and this area. Like, one is neutrality. Second is independence. Third is clarity. Fourth is boldness. Then another is the arbitrator should have knowledge, experience, expertise, and he should have exhibited that neutrality, that independence, that impartiality. But as far as selection of counsel goes, counsel is with you. You can always brief him. He will act upon your brief, your advice, depending on the case, depending on the facts of the case. So counsel always with you, but that your arbitrator is not with you. This is the difference which we have to understand. And once we understand this, then we will not equate the selection of counsel with the selection of arbitrator. Because counsel is supposed to protect your interest, the party's interest. But the arbitrator, once he assumes and he starts acting as arbitrator, so you can forget about it. What he would do would be in the best interest of the case as such, and whatever facts and evidence is there available on record, he will act accordingly, and as per the law, and in accordance to the procedure laid down, in the best interest of both, not in the interest of the party who nominated. So this is the basic difference. Thank you.
Thank you for explaining it so well, sir. So my next question to you would be, as of now, the selection of arbitrators by the respondent state is also often complex. as it involves the advice of several governmental agencies that can potentially be involved in the litigation. Do you think we will witness any change relating to this in the future?
Look, ideally, it is a question of confidence. So, like parties have confidence, similarly, governments in all jurisdictions, in all countries, should have confidence. Why should they take more time and consult different departments, agencies? That job is required to be done for the council. That council will take care of their interests. Whether the council has the expertise, whether he'll be able to look after the interest of the government or its agencies. So that process is justified as far as council is concerned. But as far as the arbitrator is concerned, I don't think that there is a requirement for the different agencies. You know, if there are 10 or 20 agencies involved, how will they find out, or whether will they arrive at a consensus about the arbitrator, and how will it impact the selection of the arbitrator? And arbitrator is an independent and impartial and is a neutral person. So yes, the interest of the government is also required to be safeguarded, and government is looking forward for safeguarding its interests everywhere in all jurisdictions, all countries. So there is nothing wrong in that. But then, if they must find out from all agencies involved, it's a Herculean task. I have served with the government, and I know how difficult the process is. You have to get an integrated approach, the wholesome approach. You have to get inputs from all agencies, because you never know what question or issue will arise, or what question or issue will get left out. So in either of those scenarios, we can't afford to take a chance. So government must do it. It's all instrumentalities, and all agencies, all departments must get together, must put their acts together, mind together, and evolve a solution. So that is as far as the brief goes, the preparation goes, the documentation goes, the projection goes, the presentation goes, and the whole case goes. So, but then I don't think it is that applicable. There are 20 agencies, they will have confidence, and they will show and exhibit to 20 arbitrators. So how will that consensus will be arrived at? So it is not, I don't think it is that far stretchable that agencies and departments and instrumentalities and other people are given a say in the selection of arbitrator. But yes, of course, they will have the say as far as the facts of the case are concerned, the witnesses, the expert evidence, the projection, the presentation, and all that. Of course, that is justified. So the main stakeholders would know, they would have done their homework, and they would know that in whom they can have confidence. I would not say that who will be able to safeguard their interest. That is wrong on my part to say that, but they will of course look forward that who will understand our case, and who will do the justice to the case as such, whether the facts are coming from this side or that side. So this is what the independence and the neutrality and the impartiality come in. And to ensure this, all jurisdictions across the world globally, they have made, including the United Nations and the global, all the treaties and all the instruments which have been signed and which are in vogue, even our arbitration act also, they classify various, whether it is schedule 5th, 6th, 7th, or it is red, orange, or green, where they say that, like we have in 5th schedule, the grounds which give rise to justifiable doubts to the independence or impartiality of arbitrators. This is our 5th schedule. Similarly, it deals with the arbitrator's relationship with the parties or counsel. Then it deals with the relationship of the arbitrator to the dispute as such. Then it sees arbitrator's direct or indirect interest in the dispute. Then we have previous services of one of the parties or the others' involvement in the case as such. Then we have relationship between the arbitrator and other arbitrator or counsel. Then we also have relationship between arbitrator and party and others involved in the arbitration. Then we have other circumstances which are not covered here. Then we have 6th schedule, which the arbitrator is supposed to make a declaration. Then we have 7th schedule, then which talks of the arbitrator's relationship with the parties or counsel. Then we have relationship of the arbitrator to the dispute. Then arbitrators direct or indirect in the dispute as such. And there are various explanations given. It's a very elaborate thing. And it is all part of the, I'm not saying that it is Indian Arbitration Act. Globally, they have ensured over a period of time, the Law Commission reports, various courts' judgments, and the law has evolved over a period of time, whether it's in civil law or in the common law countries. So they have ensured in this form or the other, the framing of the wordings may differ, but the sole idea remains same, ensuring the neutrality, the independence, impartiality, and conscionable or unconscionable partiality or impartiality. So, of course, those are being taken care of. One has to study all these. Very interesting case laws are there. I am running out of time. And in another session, I look forward for, so that we can case by case and a country-wise country, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and it will be a good session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an insightful answer. So, mainly focusing upon impartiality, my last question would be, what are the basic requirements of being an impartial arbitrator?
No, thank you so much. Your all questions are so insightful that it really covers whole gambit of what should be understood. Questions also indicate a lot of understanding. If a question definitely shows that the background to this has already been understood, and that is where this doubt has arisen. Now, impartiality, the arbitrator has to show impartiality in each and every stage. While conducting the proceedings, in his thought process, in his own conduct, inside the arbitral tribunal and outside the arbitral tribunal, treat both the parties at par, give both the parties equal opportunity, be fair in his thought process, and give sufficient, adequate opportunity to both the parties to present their cases. And no party should be, wanting or should be thinking that I have not been given fair opportunity or full opportunity. Because, like I told you earlier also, that the genesis of this will come from the judgments and the sections which pertain to the challenges. So when you read those sections which deal with the challenges, and you read those judgments which have dealt with such challenges, that will be very clear. And the basic, again and again, what is repeated in our judgments globally by all courts in all jurisdictions, that a common person, a layman, should have been able to arrive at this in this set of circumstances or in this set of facts of the case. Now, so if a person goes haywire, and so haywire that a man of common knowledge and average legal background, non-legal background, or common person having common sense will never take this decision. That will be a deciding factor. So it can be put in those many words, or if you have understood the focus of this is that your deed, your words, your conduct, your decisions, your judgment, your orders, even day to day, time management, case management, and all that, which is a huge area in itself. It is more so when we have virtual or digital, way of tackling these. So everything is recorded. Everything is so transparent. And everything is being seen by both the parties. So one party has to lose, one party has to win, judgment has to be given, the dispute has to be resolved. So it is not connected with that. But when you consider the facts of the case, whether it has been given by one party or the other party, whatever is available before you in the form of the proceedings or the evidence or record, opinion, expert opinion, whatever. So that is the whole thing which will instill confidence in you that you have to give a judgment, because it is your duty to resolve the dispute. The both parties cannot win and both parties cannot lose. There is a dispute, and that dispute has to be decided with clarity, with boldness, in accordance to the rules and regulations, in accordance to the commercial and the contractual obligations. And the whole legal system is there to support you. If you have done that, then be rest assured that the courts will hold your hand, and the award will never, be successfully challenged or will never be set aside. And courts take pride even highlighting the strong points of the proceedings of the arbitrator or arbitral proceedings. And they consider, because everything is on record, everything has been recorded, so it will automatically speak for itself. One need not worry much. If once the duty has been given to you, you must decide and be bold, and you must have clarity, and you should avoid ambiguity, and you should not worry much about what the losing party will think. Or till the time you are able to justify. The important factor before I depart from the topic or the question as such, that you should be able to justify. Whether you are saying A or you're saying B or you're saying C, you should be able to justify, you should be able to reason it out. Why A? And why not B? And why not C? So why are you opting option A? And why have you gone for this decision? Why have you given this order? So from the facts of the case and all the material existing before you, if you are able to do that, sift and crystallize clear reasoning out with clarity and boldness, I would feel that an arbitrator has done justice, would have done justice, and they do justice. So we need not worry much about this. And as an arbitrator, from the approach of the arbitrator, what I am saying, that even the losing party, if they feel satisfied, then you have done your job. If the losing party says, yes, my facts was this and my circumstances were this, but then arbitrator had done a good job and he feels satisfied. So there's a greater satisfaction with the arbitrator would, draw, that though he has done justice, but even the losing party feels that he has been given sufficient opportunity to project its case, and natural justice was done. He was very fair, or she was very fair in the dealing, and that is what our earning is. Our earning is not the money which is paid to us or the fees which paid to us. The earning is that the parties must feel satisfied, and they should not have any ground to complain or challenge which does not exist. They may challenge, is a part of their duty. The party would like them to challenge, so they may challenge, but then record will speak for itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for covering all the aspects so comprehensively.
Thank you so much, Dinesh, sir, for gracing this session with your knowledge, experience, and guidance on the topic of today and tomorrow's arbitration, future developments in the selection and conduct of arbitrators. I'm sure students will be greatly benefited from this interactive session. Next, to place on record my special thanks to our principal in charge of Bharatiya Vidyapeeth, deemed to be University, New Law College, Pune, Dr. Bhagyashree Deshpande ma'am, for her constant support and guidance. A big thanks to the management team of Bharatiya Vidyapeeth, deemed to be University, New Law College, Pune, and a heartfelt thank to all the students participating in today's session. Thank you, everyone.